Can I just ask who was in the main hall this morning and saw my talk about Dell? Is that what I said? 1, 2, that was it, right? So I had a suit on this morning, and I looked slightly taller, had heels on, so same way. So look, the first few slides of this presentation are the same as that I used before, but I think in order to position what Dell has to offer here, it's important to actually define what the problem is and actually recognize and discuss if these are some of the problems that you're trying to solve, so we can position the technology. So can I just, a quick show of hands, how many of you have virtualized some or all of your servers in a data center today? Vast majority, okay. How many of you are running a storage device that virtualizes all of the drives to assist and work in association with something like vMotion? Okay, cool. And how many of you are working with or have experimented with virtual network layer to simplify or virtualize the network infrastructure? Most of you. Great, I'm going then. So, that's kind of the business that we're in. Dell, I guess our approach to the data center is that the server is the center of the data center, and everything kind of spreads out from there. In terms of our position in the market, in North America, we are #1 for servers. We ship more servers than any other vendor in the world, and that's true of kind of the Asia Pacific region. It's not true in EMEA. We're #2 across the board. In some countries, #6. In some countries, we're #1. But EMEA has so many different countries and different languages, it makes it very difficult to operate in that market. But in terms of our server capability, we've just launched recently our 12th generation servers. And I could give you 20 slides that will give you comparisons to some of our competitors, slides that say we've won awards around their capability. But I guess kind of as a general rule of thumb, we have a end-to-end server proposition from simple single socket right through to highly dense blade environments with efficient cooling, efficient power, simple to deploy, simple to manage. So on that basis then, what I'm going to talk about today is how now we've linked all of the components of a virtualization infrastructure or a cloud infrastructure, if you like, into a simple to deploy and more importantly, pre-tested. So I'm going to talk a lot about vStart, and I'm going to talk a lot about active system. vStart is the actual hardware component. So the the server, the storage, the networking, the rack, the power, the cabling. Pre-tested, pre-installed, pre-configured. The idea being that that's something that should be plug and play. You bring it into the data center, plug it in and it plays. The rest is kind of software elements around that, which is how we manage it. So I'm going to talk about active system infrastructure and how that makes management of a virtual data center much more cost effective because it's simple, and then also about how that links to our hardware infrastructure. Did it work it out? I was on stage. And that concludes my presentation for today. Okay. So I showed this diagram this morning, and if you've been in this business for any period of time, and again, I'm assuming, let me just check, I should never assume because assume is a bad thing to do. I'm assuming that the majority of the people in this room actually have responsibility for implementing, managing, or making decisions at some point about what happens in a data center. Yeah, we're all semi-technical. I'm not a super technical guy. I understand the technology, but if you ask me to pick up a screwdriver, I'd probably get arrested for holding it the wrong way around, right? So I'm not the guy that racks and stacks, but I understand fundamentally the technology. But more importantly, as I said in my very first slide, if you were with the session this morning, is that this journey from, you know, traditional deployed IT to cloud-based compute provision is a journey. It's from, you know, a data center that has, you know, typically in a medium-sized data center you have somebody responsible for servers and somebody responsible for storage and maybe somebody responsible for networking, and there's always going to be some friction or tension between those organizations. So, you know, this is a very familiar scenario. If you want to deploy a new application, you've got to have some server resource, you've got to have some storage resource, you've got to have networking resource, you've got to have somebody from the application team telling you what kind of resource they need. And ultimately, you know, it is very time consuming, it's very labor intensive, it is a source of tension within the organization where valuable IT teams are doing what is basically fairly simple work, but it is work that needs to be done, that could be automated, that could be simplified if we thought about deploying and building a data center in a slightly more efficient way. We said, Gartner is saying that going forward, over 1/3 of what happens in the data center will be purchased as converged infrastructure. And not only will it be converged infrastructure from a hardware perspective, what we're experiencing and what we are putting a lot of effort behind is delivering infrastructure that is specifically designed, tested, and approved for a specific workload. So if we look at so can I just ask, how many of you here run SharePoint? Is anybody here actually a SharePoint administrator? No? So here is an example of what I mean by efficient infrastructure based on workload. SharePoint is one of Microsoft's, I think it actually is Microsoft's fastest growing application ever. And that quite surprised me when I found that out, because I would have said it would be Exchange or Excel or Word. It's not, it's SharePoint. And what SharePoint does is consume huge amounts of data storage and compute power. And in the vast majority of installations, normally what happens is the infrastructure that was originally designed to run SharePoint runs out of compute power, storage power, networking bandwidth very, very quickly. The SQL databases get very, very fat, and it becomes very difficult to manage. So what Dell has been doing is saying, okay, if I were to design an optimized plug-and-play solution for a SharePoint environment, what would it look like? And let's now build and test. So for an end user, for someone that's purchasing, we could say, we know that this infrastructure here will support and will deliver this level of performance for this many users, for this much data in this configuration. So again, it is consumed based on a converged, here is everything you need in one kind of stack, rather than build your own. Now, you can still, from Dell, buy the individual components yourself, if that's what you want to do. You can, base that on reference architecture that we will publish and say, if you're going to run an Exchange for 5,000 users on an iSCSI storage platform, this is what it would look like. Or you can buy that as a pre-configured, ready to manage with all the management capability built in, and consume it on that basis. So this is what we're trying to do, move from a domain-centric to a workload-centric model, where in any delivery of application, you're going to need some compute power, some storage, some networking, certainly virtualization is going to play a part in that, and then you need to manage it. Going forward, from a workload perspective, what you want is a single management pane for every component within the stack you would deliver an application on, so that your paradigm changes. And what that looks like is, here's traditionally how an IT department or an IT budget might be viewed. That it is, from a business perspective, it's something that has to be maintained. It is a cost overhead. It's not a business generator, and they are providers of infrastructure to allow me to run my business. Okay, the characteristics of the traditional data center, or how we have deployed data, has been that it's fixed, slow, it's difficult to manage, it's fragmented because we've purchased elements of our data center over time, and now we're struggling to manage. Where we want to get to, and if you look at application-centric or a workload-centric data center, what you want is the business and the IT department now to have a single strategy where the data center is seen as an innovator, somebody that can provide data faster, somebody that can provide capability to analyze data. So who's heard the term big data? Do you know what we used to call that? Data. Right? It's just more of it because our users produce more of it. And a lot of that data is now produced automatically, so it gets bigger and bigger. So what you want in terms of managing that data is to simplify, deduplicate, automate a lot of the process to ensure that the data is on the right value platform based on its value to the business. So the business wants to see you as a service provider and often a revenue generator. And I think one of the most interesting statements that I heard, or comments that I heard, was from the gentleman from Hewlett Packard when he said many of the organizations that they've been talking to about the virtualization journey have not just been thinking about how do I now build a data center that works for me to run my business, but also thinking about, is there something that I do that I can now sell to somebody else as a service? And this is kind of where the hosters have come from. If you think about what the hosters of 10 years ago used to provide as a service and what they provide now, it's a completely different level of service. So infrastructure as a service, software as a service. Okay, so when we start thinking about those characteristics, it gives you this ability to be much more nimble, react to the market faster, and elastic is this term that's used where if you think about a project, if you say, well, I'm going to do a test and development on a new application. And if you think about now, I want to deploy a completely new application in my business, you don't want to put that into production, so you need to put it into a test and development environment. Not all of it. And I think at some point in our careers, we've wanted and needed a full, almost replicated environment that we run in our production in our test and dev. Wouldn't that be ideal? Everything I have in my production environment, I have in my test and development environment. Now we can do that if we're a big bank and we've got oodles of money, and actually if you get it wrong, it's a disaster. But in the smaller, more medium business, you don't have to say, well, I'm going to kind of run a version that's about this size. It's not quite the same size as production, but we'll get some idea. And we'll kind of make a best effort to say, yeah, we're pretty sure that's going to work in production based on what we were able to test. That's no longer acceptable. It's no longer feasible to say, yeah, I kind of think it might work because IT now is at the center of our organizations. It's not kind of a background task, it's the center, it is the business. Therefore, we have to say, yeah, we've tested, it's robust, we know that it's going to deliver this level of service. So what elasticity means, or elastic environment means, is I can scale up a test and development environment, make sure that that works, deploy that into production, and then reclaim or reduce that level of capability based on what my needs are. So this is when we saw the slide with the pendulum, what's a private cloud, what's public cloud, when do you use both? And this idea of a hybrid, the IDC statement saying that ultimately your cloud will be made up of lots of different clouds that you will use based on whatever the work requirement is at the time. So this is things like test and development of, for example, backup and DR, things like that. So this is what we're looking for, or this is what many organizations that are looking into, how do I meet the needs of the business over the next 3, 5, 10 years based on the speed that data is growing. So I can never do one of these presentations without talking about some kind of analysis of the market and how fast data is growing. And there are lots of these. But my favorite one is, ever since the first block of data was written in somewhere in the 50s, up until about, it's 1987. So from the first block of data ever written up to every block of data that was written in 1987. So you think about that as a combined block of data, right? Combined. That is now produced almost daily. So from the beginning of time to 87 is now produced daily. And the prediction going forward in terms of how fast data is going to be generated is just off the scale. So what we have to have is an environment that allows us to scale as we need to, and also an environment that makes it very simple to manage and categorize data. So in your storage environments now, how many of you are using tiering? Yeah? So tiering is nothing new, because DBAs have been doing this for a while, okay? Moving data around to where it's most efficient, where it needs to be. But again, when you think about now the volumes of the data and how labor intensive it is to do that as a manual process, what you need in terms of simplified management is an infrastructure that says we can now, based on policy, on template, on value of data, move that data to where it is most cost effective. So high value, immediate or created in the last week data needs to be on your most high performing platform. But in 30 days, it's going to be a different level of value to the business. So another interesting statistic, and it changes on depending on who you ask. And closest guess here, I'll buy them a cup of coffee, but an Excel file, of all the Excel files that are written and saved, what percentage do you think are actually reopened once they're saved?
What?
It's around 3. It's like 97% of all Excel files, once completed and saved, are never opened again. And it's the same for Word files. Okay? And the other interesting one, I can't remember what someone said, from a viral storage thief, photos of, new car, babies, or video of what I did at the weekend, you send that to one person, I think it gets, on average, it gets sent to another 15 people. So generally, if you've got a photo of me at the weekend in my race car, and I go, this is what I did at the weekend, there'll be 20 copies of it, or 30 copies of it, in your storage environment. Now, you can go through and go, oh yeah, that's another copy, delete, that's another copy, delete. Or you can say, nobody can actually put anything on the network, you can't do this, you can reduce the size, that doesn't work either. So what we need, again, is simplified management to say, anything that is duplicated, I want it deduplicated. Anything that needs to be compressed, I need it to be compressed, and you set that as a policy so it's simplified, it's done through one pane of graph, and you get into this, right, I can now manage the data growth, I can manage the compute power necessary, and I can manage new application integration and deployment much faster and much more effectively, because the infrastructure that I have is going to allow me to do that. So for us, and again, I think if you go to any vendor, and it doesn't matter who the vendor is, they'll say, the cloud is not a destination, it's the journey, and everybody here is somewhere on the journey, right? So we can all recognize we're somewhere along this path, right? We've done a bit of virtualization, maybe we've got storage infrastructure that uses virtualization more effectively and stuff, blah, blah, blah. The ultimate goal is that we have this automated data center that the only thing you have to do is say, yeah, I need to give it more compute power, I need to give it more storage, and you just kind of plug, play, switch on, and it takes care of itself. You don't have to touch it, right? You saw the Revlon video, where the guy said, our cloud actually makes 1,000 decisions itself every day. That's where we need to get to. Kind of makes you go, does that mean like the Terminator is actually going to come true? We don't worry about that sort of stuff sometimes. But this is where we are. So where does Dell fit into this? We have been in this area of the market for a long time. We sell servers, we sell storage, we sell networking, we sell management capability, and we're in the software business. Pre-integrated infrastructure with embedded management is what we've been talking about, and a converged system with the management stack is what I'm here to talk about. now and just give you a few details around. I don't want to go into too many bits and bobs. But this is the point I want to get to. So converged data center and automated data center, we are building now capability. Everything that we do in kind of our design, everything we've done in terms of our acquisition strategy is designed to get us towards the point where we can say to our customers, however you want to consume compute power from us, you can. If you want to do it modular, if you want to do it in bits, you can. If you want us to provide the whole thing, if you want to host it yourself, if you want us to host it, if you want us to help you manage a kind of dual hosting capability, that's where we're going to be. So this is kind of what active infrastructure looks like, right? So down here, the foundation has to be virtual network architecture, so you can move data where you need to move that without having to kind of move cables around. And we use this term fluid data architecture. So I don't want to get too much into a storage presentation here, but one of the key components of being able to deliver IT in this way and make it from a management perspective simple is you need intelligent storage. Okay, so we've been listening to and hearing a lot in the press software-defined storage. Have you heard that? Yeah, we've heard this term, software-defined storage. We've been doing that for the last 6 years. So if you look into our run arrays and you pull one of the disk drives out, do you think it says Dell on the disk drive? Oh, it'll say Hitachi or Seagate or whoever has the best disk drive. If you pull one of our controllers out and you look at the components on that controller, do you think any of those will say Dell? No. So, if you pull a fan out, does it say Dell on the fan? No. So software has been at the heart of everything we do. We've been doing software-defined storage since the point that Equalogic was brought into the business. In fact, it was the foundation of this kind of whole fluid data architecture was you need to abstract the hardware from the software. So the hardware, and again, you saw a similar path from our colleagues at EMC today. Okay, they're saying you need to abstract what's happening down here. It's about what happens with the software layer. Well, we've been there for a long time, and now we get to a point where we have that very, very well tailored together, and we can deliver that in an infrastructure that's simple to manage, will scale, will give you that elasticity, and allow you to actually deliver compute capability in a far more simple, low-resourced manner. And there's a great kind of automated graphic at the end of this that I'll show you that kind of does that. So this is kind of how it looks. Active infrastructure is based on, I talked about Gale Technologies. Gale Technologies had very, very smart management software. It gives you single pane of glass management for compute, storage, infrastructure. We have a ready-to-go System 8000, which will, again, we talked about some of the use cases for virtualized infrastructure or converged infrastructure. One of those is delivering the back end for a virtual desktop infrastructure. So is anybody here considering or has deployed virtual desktops? Yeah? So when you did that, you had to think about what was I going to deliver from a client perspective, but also what did I need at the back end to be able to run that, to not have kind of boot storms and be able to kind of boot storms. You thought about that stuff, right? Took you a bit of time to do. Did you get it right first time? Took a bit of tweaking, right? So one of the things that again Dell is thinking about and delivering today is saying, look, if you need to run 1,000 virtual desktops, here's everything you need to do there. Pre-tested, pre-configured, delivered like that on a pallet. Plug in, the only thing you need to do is make sure you've got the right power, even down to we'll tell you here's how it works from a cooling perspective. And again, without getting into specifics, Dell has worked very hard with the 12th generation servers. One of the big challenges, as we hear all the time now, is power and cooling, right? So I went to a data center in the city 6 years ago, and I walked into this data center and there's kind of racks here, and then there's a huge gap, and then there's another kind of row of racks here, and I said, well, why isn't there a row here? And they said, well, we haven't got enough power. We can't get, and this was in the city, right? It was in the Docklands, so this is somewhere we think there'd be abundance of power. No, we can't get enough power into this building. We can't get enough power rating into this building to fill this floor. So it's a huge amount of space, which they're charged per square metre, that they couldn't actually densely populate because the amount of power they needed to cool as well as power the servers was too high. So again, if you can reduce the power you need to run your infrastructure, and again, I'm not going to go into the percentages because all of this stuff is available online on the website and you can read this stuff. But Dell now has one of the most efficient cooling platforms from a server perspective on the planet. And if you want to see that in action, you want to see a big implementation where power and cooling was very important, there's a case study on our website around eBay and how we actually designed one of their data centers, and we put their whole data center on a roof in a very hot, I think it's Arizona, so it's very hot, so cooling becomes very important. Okay, so we do that stuff very, very efficiently. So, breaking that down then into some of the kind of the key features that you'll get in active infrastructure, being able to say standardized workloads. This is what you need to run 1,000 Exchange email boxes. This is what you need to be able to run 50 users, 60 users, 100 users on an Oracle database. Okay, so standardized workloads. Discover, inventory, configuration and provisioning. Again, when we talked about the infrastructure making decisions on its own, how it should be configured based on the workload, again, this is nothing new. You can do this manually, but when you drive cost out of the business, and you saw the slide I said this morning, which was in a global survey done by lots of people, IDC, Gartner, lots of independent people, there is still a very, very high percentage of IT budget that is spent on actually just maintaining what you've got. And in most cases, that hovers around the 70 to 80% of your IT budget, leaving very little money for innovation. As I said, if your finance department came to you and said, I'm going to treble your IT budget this year for you to spend, you wouldn't have any trouble in spending all that to deliver the services you want to deliver, right? So, one of the key things that Dell focuses on is if you automate those processes that are manual currently, freeing up resource to do other stuff, you reduce the cost, because the IT department is not just about the servers that you buy and the racks that you buy and the switches that you buy. It's about us as people. We need to be used as efficiently as we can. So if you can take people off of very important, very repetitive, but very necessary tasks and automate them, you free yourself more time to innovate. And again, go back to that slide, you want to be seen as an innovator and perhaps a revenue generator rather than a cost center. I won't go through these, every single one of these, but again, intelligent workflow. So how's the data going to flow through my network? Is it best to run this way? Is it best to run that way? Again, you can make those decisions yourself, and you can sit down with a calculator and a pencil and a network diagram and say, well, maybe if I make that kind of 10 gig and I reduce it, you can do that. But if you say, here's what I'm going to need for this workload, I'm going to need this much compute power, this much network power, and this much storage, and then the infrastructure works that out for itself, and maybe thin provision, so you haven't got all of it, so you're actually losing less physical hardware. All of those capabilities come in Active System Manager. So just looking at the components of that and what makes Active Infrastructure up. So at the bottom, from a storage perspective, typically we would deploy in the lower end, sort of the V50. So we have, from a vStart perspective, which is the actual infrastructure, a V50, a V100, a V200, a V1000. And this means this infrastructure is tested and configured and will run up to 50 instances, and we can take that to the bank. You don't have to worry about it. So, Equalogic at the lower end, going up to Compellent at the higher end, so vStart 1000. So our storage infrastructure has all of those components we've talked about. It has automated tiering. It has the ability to thin provision. It has smart data progression and data movement. None of these things we have to think about. So all of that things happen in the background automatically. We saw, and I showed a diagram earlier on of our ME1000 chassis, which we can populate with very dense infrastructure as far as servers and storage is concerned. And then we have I bought a company a while back called Force 10, which has incredibly high performance back-end network power, and also kind of down to multiple layers on the sort of the switching side of the house. So what it gives you is the ability to just simplify converged infrastructure, simplify the management, give you an end-to-end solution. So the components, if you pulled them out and looked at them, they're very standard. We build all of our infrastructure based on standards. Okay, so there's no lock-in. But again, the smart element is the actual active infrastructure manager, which will manage all of those components in the stack. So, give me a chance to sit down now and just watch the graphics. So this is kind of typically what this will relate to. So when you schedule a job now, rather than have to go and find a server and find networking, you say, okay, here's from the template perspective, here's what I need to do. When do I want to schedule that? Here's the time I want it to start. Here's the time I want it to end. Okay, so the job is scheduled, here's the job number. So the date that you've scheduled, the job kicks off. And what active infrastructure says, okay, I'm going to look at the compute pool, I'm going to look at the virtualized network pool, and I'm going to look at the storage pool, and I'm going to provide the necessary storage, compute, and network power to run this job. The job will run, user then has access to the compute necessary. The job is finished, and the infrastructure automatically says, okay, that job now is completed. I'm now going to put all of that infrastructure back into the pool so it can be used by another application automatically. So how long do I need this compute capability? What compute capability do I need? What's the workload? Set all that. And again, most of the time you can template it. You say, well, I may need to run that job on and off. If you've got remote offices that run a batch process that you want to provide the compute power to on a regular basis, it's going to be the same template. You don't want to have to go over and over again. So you automate, say, this template runs from here to here, and then when it's finished, I want all of that compute power to go back into the general pool so it can be used for something else. Okay? So I don't want to kind of just keep going through slides. So what I wanted to do now is just to kind of open the floor and say, are there any specific questions, any specific areas that you're looking at that I can either answer the question now or get somebody that can answer the question when it comes to converged infrastructure from Dell? Because I have a plane 5 to 5, so I have to go from here in about 7 minutes. Well, when I say go, I have to run, physically run, which is why I put my sneakers on, rather than my suit shoes, because I'll just fall over. So is everything that I've said today, all of this is not only on our website, all of our case studies, so just kind of some of the case studies, and I don't want to go through and read the slide, and I can come up with hundreds of these. Most of the time when I have a conversation with an end user, and the conversation always starts, what are you trying to do? What problem are you trying to solve? And it's generally, I need to cut costs on producing this thing. I need to get more customers faster. I need to grow my capability because I've just going to go into this market. I've just bought this company, I need to integrate. We start with that point. And then, you get towards the end and say, well, we can help you with every aspect of that from the point that you enter the data, because that's been our heritage. We do great PCs, workstations. The infrastructure now, in every element of the infrastructure, moving the data, simplifying movement of that data, storage of that data, compute power, all of that end to end, and then lots of software layers on top to make the application integration simple. So, I could have put 30, 40 of these on. I just wanted the customers to speak for themselves. But what said to me more than anything else, and I hope if you get one thing about Dell that you didn't know before you came here, is Dell actually can provide incredibly powerful, simplified, cost-effective data center solutions end to end. And whenever I have the presentation, I go, hey, you haven't spoken to Dell. I haven't spoken to Dell for the last 4 years because we fell out with you because I had a hard drive and you didn't replace it. Okay, let me come and talk to you again. Let me tell you where I am. 9 times out of 10, people get to that moment, they rub their chin like this and they go, I had no idea Dell could do that. That's our biggest problem. A lot of people have no idea what we do and how we can do this. So if you take one thing away from you today, not how many drives we can put in an array, or how our virtualization integration API works with that. What I want you to take away is Dell has some amazing capability in delivering solutions end to end. Everybody's needs are different. The local team here, particularly our distributor ACC and their partners, are well informed and can get you the knowledge or the information that you need. But all I want you to do is next time you think, well, I need to kind of just think about what I'm going to do with my data center infrastructure, my storage infrastructure, my networking infrastructure. All I want you to do is go on the list of people I'm going to call, put Dell on that list and call us. Because as I said, it's great. I could walk into any customer now and say, the answer is yes. What's the question? Hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'm now going to sprint to the cab and fly to another country and do the same thing. Thank you for your attention.